The oppressive stillness of early June 1944 hung heavy over Campo de Bocage, a suffocating blanket woven from fear and the humid Norman air. Each distant thud of Allied bombs, rumbling like an unsettled beast across the channel, vibrated not just through the ancient earth but through the very bones of its inhabitants. It was a sound both terrifying and strangely reassuring, a testament to the ongoing struggle against the ever-present German occupation. Every creak of a cartwheel, every rustle in the dense hedgerows, could signal the arrival of another patrol, another inspection, another chilling reminder of who truly held power in their small, beleaguered corner of France. Life moved in hushed tones, a constant, low murmur of survival under the watchful, steel-grey eyes of the Gestapo. Within this shadow-draped existence, in a modest bakery nestled amongst the winding lanes of a tiny village, lived Lucy Lefevre. At 10 years old, Lucy possessed an uncanny brightness, her eyes missing nothing, absorbing every nuance of the world around her. She was not merely a child, she was an apprentice to life, her senses sharpened by the exigencies of wartime. Her days were a tapestry of flour dust, the comforting warmth of the oven, and the rhythmic clatter of her parents preparing daily bread. Lucy often helped with deliveries, her small hands carefully balancing wicker baskets filled with fresh loaves, navigating the familiar paths and unspoken rules of their village. These errands were her classroom, where she learned to read the subtle shifts in her neighbors' faces, the hurried whispers, the sudden silences that spoke volumes. But beneath the everyday rhythms of baking and deliveries lay a dangerous secret, a pulsating heart of resistance hidden deep within their ancient barn, a radio. This crude, crackling device was their tenuous, precious link to the outside world. To the voices of the BBC, to the promises of advancing Allied forces. It was a lifeline of hope in a sea of despair, a whisper of freedom in the deafening silence of occupation. Every intercepted news bulletin, every coded message, was a fragile ember of defiance kept secretly ablaze. The radio represented everything the villagers longed for and everything the Germans sought to extinguish. Its discovery would not just mean punishment, it would mean the end of hope, the crushing of their collective spirit, and likely, the ultimate sacrifice for anyone involved. As June wore on, the threat intensified. Gestapo patrols, previously an unwelcome but intermittent presence, became disturbingly frequent, their black vehicles an ominous blur against the green landscape. Their inspections grew more aggressive, their questions sharper, their gaze more penetrating. A palpable fear, thick and suffocating, settled over the village like a fog, tightening its grip with each passing day. The air buzzed with unspoken anxieties, every encounter with the German soldiers a razor's edge. The villagers felt the tightening noose, sensed the increased scrutiny, and knew, with a chilling certainty, that the Gestapo were closing in. The hidden radio, once a source of comfort, now felt like a ticking bomb. If you're captivated by stories of courage and resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity, tales of ordinary people performing extraordinary acts, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Join us as we uncover more untold chapters of history, bringing to light the bravery that often goes unheralded. The Gestapo agents, with their stiff uniforms and colder-than-ice stares, were an increasingly common sight, their presence a corrosive acid eating away at the village's fragile peace. They weren't just passing through anymore, they were lingering, their black Mercedes sedans parked conspicuously near the main crossroads, their eyes scanning every face, every window. More unnervingly, Lucy had begun to notice them, or rather, their unusually keen interest in the old, weathered barn that stood on the edge of her family's property. One afternoon, while carefully carrying a tray of warm baguettes for Monsieur Dubois, she saw a cluster of them, pointing and speaking in sharp, guttural German, their gaze fixed on the barn's sagging wooden doors. Her child's intuition, honed by months of silent observation, screamed danger. It wasn't just a casual glance, it was a focused, almost predatory attention that sent a shiver down her spine. The air around the barn felt charged, almost electric with their unspoken suspicion. This escalating surveillance didn't escape the adults either. Whispers grew more urgent, meetings in shadowed doorways more frequent. Her father, usually a man of jovial spirit, wore a constant frown, his hands unconsciously kneading his apron. Her mother, whose eyes usually held a gentle warmth, now darted nervously between the windows and the kitchen door. The villagers, once united by a shared, silent defiance, were now bound by a growing, palpable fear. They knew the Gestapo's methods, understood the brutal consequences of discovery. The hidden radio, their precious link to hope, was no longer a secret they simply protected, but a ticking time bomb whose detonation was imminent. Every passing German patrol near the barn, every lingering look, felt like a tightening noose. The consensus among the grown-ups was grim: the Gestapo knew something, or at least suspected enough to warrant this intense scrutiny. The radio's discovery was not merely a possibility, it felt like an inevitability, and the repercussions for the entire village, for every family, would be catastrophic. Lives, livelihoods, and the very spirit of their resistance hung precariously in the balance. There was a desperate need for a solution, a way to divert this menacing attention, but no one dared to voice a plan, trapped as they were in a paralysis of fear. Lucy, however, was not paralyzed. While the adults grappled with their despair, her mind, quick and agile, was already racing. She understood the gravity of the situation, perhaps even more acutely than some of the grown-ups, seeing the fear reflected in their unguarded eyes. She knew every hidden path, every overgrown shortcut, and every forgotten corner of their village like the back of her hand. Her daily deliveries had etched these intricate details into her memory: the old rutted road leading away from the village towards the forgotten mill, the dense thicket by the river bend, the crumbling stone wall that offered a brief, secluded passage. These were not just routes, they were pieces of a puzzle, elements of a potential diversion. As she cleaned the flour from her hands that evening, a daring, audacious idea began to coalesce in her young mind. It was a plan born of innocence but fueled by a fierce, protective love for her family and her village. It was risky, incredibly so, but in the face of certain discovery, perhaps a child's ingenuity was their only remaining weapon. The seed of a desperate, audacious plan had been sown, and Lucy, with her quick wit and intimate knowledge of the labyrinthine village, started to envision how she could divert the looming Gestapo threat. Her heart pounded a desperate rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of courage in the face of overwhelming fear. The nascent idea, a fragile seedling in Lucy's mind, began to blossom into a fully formed plan, driven by the acute awareness that time was their most precious commodity. She waited for a moment of quiet, the drone of distant planes providing a muted backdrop to the stifled silence of their home. Approaching her parents in the dim light of the bakery's back room, her small voice, usually so clear and bright, was hushed, almost conspiratorial. She laid out her audacious strategy, explaining precisely how she intended to mislead the Gestapo, using her innocent appearance as a shield and the village's forgotten corners as her stage. Her parents, their faces etched with worry and exhaustion, listened intently. Apprehension flickered in their eyes, a deep-seated fear for their daughter's safety competing with the desperate glimmer of hope her words ignited. It was a perilous gamble, a child against an empire, but as Lucy finished speaking, a silent understanding passed between them. They knew, without needing to articulate it, that this was indeed their only chance, a final throw of the dice before an inevitable, devastating end. With a heavy heart but a resolute nod, her father gave his hesitant approval, a silent prayer forming on his lips. The next morning, with a basket of fresh bread clutched tightly in her hands, Lucy embarked on her perilous mission. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped within her chest, yet her face remained a mask of childish innocence, perfected through years of observing adult deceptions. She saw them, just as she had anticipated, two Gestapo agents standing near the edge of the village, their imposing figures casting long, sinister shadows in the pale morning light. One was leaning against a requisitioned civilian car, its dark paint gleaming menacingly, while the other paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze sweeping over the landscape with an unnerving intensity. Lucy took a deep, steadying breath, reminding herself of her purpose, of the radio hidden in the barn, of the lives that hung in the balance. She adjusted her grip on the basket, letting the warm scent of baked bread precede her. With a practiced ease, she approached them, a sweet, almost shy smile gracing her lips. "Good morning, gentlemen," she chirped in flawless French, her voice light and musical. "My mother sent me with bread for Monsieur Dubois." Her eyes, wide and seemingly guileless, met theirs for a fleeting moment before dropping demurely. As she moved past them, her movements deliberately a little clumsy, a small, folded piece of paper, seemingly an afterthought, slipped from her apron pocket. It fell silently to the dusty ground, landing just a few feet from the pacing agent. Lucy, feigning obliviousness, continued on her way, her small footsteps echoing on the quiet lane. The note, a carefully crafted piece of misdirection, contained only a few hastily scribbled lines, hinting at her message for the priest and cryptically mentioning activity on the old road, near the forgotten mill, a deliberate red herring designed to pique their Nazi curiosity. She didn't look back, but she felt their eyes on her, felt the subtle shift in their attention as one of them stooped to retrieve the innocuous-looking scrap. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, quickly suppressed. Phase 1 was complete. Now for the next part of her intricate deception. As she continued her delivery route, moving away from the Gestapo's current position, her eyes scanned for the next crucial element of her plan. When she reached the weathered wooden gate that marked the beginning of the seldom used, overgrown track leading toward the old mill, the very old road mentioned in her note, she paused. From her pocket, she produced a vibrant red ribbon, a startling splash of color against the muted greens and browns of the Norman countryside. With deliberate, almost theatrical slowness, she tied it conspicuously to the topmost rail of the gate, letting its ends flutter gently in the soft breeze. It was a beacon, a silent, unmistakable marker, deliberately placed to draw attention, a visual confirmation of the cryptic words on the crumpled paper now, hopefully, in the hands of the Gestapo. It wasn't just a ribbon, it was an invitation, a carefully laid trap, designed by a 10-year-old girl to lure dangerous men away from their true target. Her heart continued its frantic beat, but a surge of determination now mingled with the fear. The Gestapo agents, their initial suspicion piqued by the child's seemingly accidental clue, exchanged swift, sharp words in their harsh language. The one who had retrieved the note smoothed out the crumpled paper, his brow furrowed in concentration. The mention of the priest, a figure often entwined with local resistance, combined with the specific, if vague, reference to an old road, was enough to ignite their ingrained paranoia. They were trained to see conspiracy in every shadow, deviance in every innocent gesture. A 10-year-old girl, delivering bread with a demure smile, was hardly a threat, merely an unwitting conduit of information. They scanned the path Lucy had taken, their eyes eventually falling upon the vivid red ribbon fluttering in the gentle breeze, an undeniable signpost leading precisely where the note had suggested. It was too perfect to be coincidence, in their minds. A genuine lead, they surmised, carelessly dropped by an innocent. They were blinded by their own assumptions and the ingrained belief that children were incapable of such elaborate deception. Their focus shifted with a decisive, almost audible snap. The barn, which had been the object of their intense scrutiny for days, was momentarily forgotten, overshadowed by the promise of immediate action and a potential new catch. With guttural commands, the Gestapo agents scrambled into their vehicle. The engine roared to life, a discordant symphony of metal and power, its sound echoing ominously through the quiet village. Lucy, hidden behind a thick hedgerow a little further down the lane, watched, her heart a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. The dark vehicle lurched forward, kicking up dust as it veered sharply onto the narrow, overgrown track leading towards the old mill, the very old road she had so cleverly highlighted. The sight of their retreating car, its menacing presence diminishing in the distance, sent a wave of electric relief washing over her. The diversion had worked. It was a fragile victory, but a victory nonetheless. Precious minutes, perhaps even hours, had been bought, a reprieve from the suffocating pressure that had held the village captive. Inside the barn, the sudden sound of the Gestapo vehicle speeding away brought a collective gasp, quickly followed by a flurry of frantic activity. Her father, his face streaked with flour and sweat, moved with renewed urgency, his large hands working with surprising dexterity. Neighbors, who had been on edge for days, now toiled with a desperate energy. The hidden radio, their lifeline and their greatest risk, had to vanish without a trace. Wires were snipped, components carefully detached, and the heavy casing quickly disassembled. Each piece was then wrapped in burlap, hidden deep within piles of hay, beneath loose floorboards, and even buried shallowly in the damp earth in strategic, prearranged spots. Every scrap of evidence, every stray wire or smudged blueprint, was meticulously collected and either burned or secreted away. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, dust, and the metallic tang of fear and hurried effort. They worked in a furious, almost silent symphony of desperation, knowing that their lives, and the lives of their families depended on the speed and thoroughness of their actions. Meanwhile, Lucy, still concealed by the hedgerow, felt a complex tangle of emotions churning within her small chest. There was a surge of exhilaration, a heady rush that came with the successful execution of her daring plan. She had done it. She, a mere child, had outsmarted these formidable, cruel men. But beneath that triumphant feeling, a cold, hard knot of fear remained. The immense risk she had taken weighed heavily on her. What if they returned early? What if they discovered the deception? The potential consequences, though not fully understood in their horrifying detail by her young mind, were vast and terrifying. She pictured her parents, the neighbors, their faces etched with gratitude only moments before, now replaced with expressions of despair or worse. The weight of responsibility of having risked so much settled upon her small shoulders. Her brave facade, so convincing just moments ago, felt like it might crumble. Still, she held her breath, listening to the fading roar of the Gestapo's car, willing it to disappear completely, praying for the precious seconds to turn into minutes, and the minutes into enough time for her village to save itself. Her small hands, which had so recently tied a deceptive ribbon, now trembled unseen in the quiet morning air. The village fell into an eerie, suffocating silence, a hollow space left by the roaring engine of the retreating Gestapo vehicle. Only the distant, fading grind of the tires on the unpaved old road punctuated the heavy stillness, a sound that slowly, agonizingly, diminished until it was swallowed by the dense hedgerows and the vast Norman sky. For Lucy, still crouched behind the thorny embrace of the hedgerow, the silence was almost more terrifying than the previous noise. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions, with a lingering scent of danger, and the agonizing wait for the unknown. Every rustle of leaves, every twitter of a bird, seemed amplified, carrying the potential for a sudden, unwelcome return. She strained her ears, imagining the Gestapo's frustration building with every fruitless search down the winding, overgrown path to the forgotten mill. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each one a precarious tightrope walk between hope and despair. Inside the barn, the frantic activity continued for a few more tense moments, a flurry of last-minute checks and double-checks. Her father, his face now grimed with dust and sweat, carefully pushed the last hidden piece of the radio deep into a pile of hay, smoothing the surface so no telltale bulge remained. Neighbors, their faces pale but resolute, stood back, their chest heaving with exertion and relief. The radio, their precarious lifeline, was gone, disassembled and scattered, its presence erased. Every trace, every stray wire, every tool used in its dismantling, had been either burned or meticulously hidden. A profound, collective sigh of relief, heavy with exhaustion, rippled through the small group. They had done it. Against all odds, for now, they had averted disaster. But it was a temporary victory, a reprieve bought by the audacious courage of a child. The threat was not gone, it was merely delayed, diverted. Lucy, sensing the passage of time and the prolonged absence of the Gestapo, finally emerged from her hiding spot. She brushed the dust from her dress, her small hand still trembling slightly, but her face composed, a mask of innocent weariness. She walked back towards the bakery, her steps measured and deliberate, careful not to draw any undue attention. Her heart still pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a persistent echo of the immense risk she had taken, but her resolve remained firm. She had played her part, and now she needed to resume the facade of a normal 10-year-old girl. Delivering bread. The aroma of freshly baked goods greeted her as she approached the bakery, a comforting normalcy that felt entirely out of place after the morning's harrowing events. It was much later in the afternoon when the distinct, ominous hum of the Gestapo's engines returned. This time, the sound carried a different resonance, frustration. They weren't speeding, nor were they looking with an intense, predatory focus. Instead, their dark vehicle rumbled back into the village slowly, almost sullenly. The faces of the agents, visible through the windows of their car, were grim, their expressions tight with irritation and annoyance. Lucy, peeking through a crack in the bakery's curtains, watched them. They exchanged curt, angry words, their gestures sharp and agitated. Clearly, their expedition down the old road had yielded absolutely nothing. They had found no priest, no secret meetings, no activity, nothing but an overgrown path leading to a crumbling mill, marked by a solitary, flapping red ribbon that must have seemed a cruel joke. Their frustration was a tangible thing, a dark cloud hanging over their retreating figures. They parked briefly near the crossroads again, their eyes sweeping the village with a renewed, albeit less focused, suspicion. Their gazes lingered on the barn for a few painful seconds, but with no outward signs of a renewed threat, no obvious reason to investigate further, their attention soon drifted. The initial intense, targeted scrutiny had been diffused, replaced by a generalized, less urgent suspicion. After a final, frustrated huddle, they climbed back into their vehicle. This time, when the engine roared, the sound was one of retreat, not pursuit. The black car turned, its tires spitting gravel, and slowly, deliberately, left the village. The sigh that swept through the village might have been imperceptible to an outsider, but to those who had lived under the shadow of the Gestapo for so long, it was a palpable easing of pressure, a collective exhalation. The immediate danger had passed. Lucy watched until the last vestige of the dark car disappeared behind the distant bend in the road. She felt a profound weariness settle over her, an exhaustion that went beyond mere physical exertion. The emotional toll of the morning had been immense, a burden few adults could have shouldered, let alone a child. But as she stood there, looking out at the now tranquil village, a quiet sense of triumph began to bloom within her. She had bought them time. She had protected her family, her friends, her village. The radio was safe, for now. The Gestapo, for all their power and ruthlessness, had been fooled by a 10-year-old girl and a simple red ribbon. The memory of their frustrated faces, their palpable annoyance, was a small, quiet victory in a world filled with far too few. The silence that now enveloped the village was no longer menacing, it was a fragile, precious peace, earned through cunning and extraordinary bravery. The immediate, suffocating fear that had gripped the village for days, weeks even, began to dissipate with the final, echoing sound of the Gestapo's departure. It wasn't a sudden, joyous burst of celebration, rather, it was a slow, tentative unfolding, like a flower unfurling after a long, dark night. A collective, almost unconscious sigh rippled through the small community. Shoulders that had been hunched in perpetual tension began to relax. Faces, previously etched with worry and pallor, seemed to regain a faint touch of color. The air, which had felt heavy and thick with apprehension, now seemed lighter, breathable again. Children, who had been confined indoors or moved with unusual quietness, began to emerge, their muted chatter gradually reasserting itself. The danger, a tangible, suffocating weight, had lifted, at least for now. It was a fragile peace, purchased at great risk, but peace nonetheless. Lucy's parents, their initial shock still evident, rushed to embrace her, their arms wrapping around her small frame with a fierce, protective gratitude that bordered on awe. Her mother, tears streaming down her cheeks, buried her face in Lucy's hair, murmuring incoherent words of love and relief. Her father, usually reserved, held her tightly, his calloused hands trembling slightly against her back. He simply squeezed his eyes shut, unable to articulate the profound depth of his feelings, the sheer terror he had felt balanced by the immense pride swelling in his chest. Later, as the immediate urgency subsided, the villagers began to gather, not openly at first, but in whispered conversations at doorsteps, in hidden corners of the bakery, their eyes constantly scanning for any lingering threat. Their gratitude was palpable, a silent wave of admiration washing over Lucy. Monsieur Dubois, a gruff old farmer who rarely offered praise, nodded solemnly, his eyes meeting hers with an unspoken acknowledgement of her courage. Madame Pelletier, the baker's wife from the next village over, squeezed Lucy's hand, her smile wider and warmer than Lucy had ever seen it. They brought small gifts, a fresh egg, a handful of berries, a carefully mended doll, humble tokens of profound thanks for an act that had undeniably saved them all from a terrible fate. Lucy, though celebrated in these quiet, intimate moments, understood the profound and dangerous nature of her act. She hadn't sought glory, she had simply acted out of an instinct for self-preservation and a deep, ingrained love for her home and her people. She felt the warmth of their admiration, but beneath it, she carried the heavy understanding that her heroism was a silent one, born of necessity and forever shrouded in secrecy. She couldn't boast, couldn't share the details of her cunning with her school friends, couldn't revel in the kind of recognition that most heroes received. Her triumph was internal, a fierce, private satisfaction that burned brightly within her. The need for continued vigilance remained etched into her consciousness. The Gestapo might have been fooled this time, but their presence in Normandy was a constant, festering wound. This was not an end, but a respite, a precious interval before the next storm. She knew that any lapse, any moment of carelessness, could bring them all back to the brink of disaster. The war raged on, and their small village remained a vulnerable speck in its vast, brutal landscape. Yet, despite the inherent danger and the quiet burden of her secret, the incident solidified something crucial within the collective spirit of the villagers. Lucy's audacious act, a child's quick thinking against the overwhelming might of the occupation, ignited a spark of renewed determination. It was a powerful, unspoken testament to the fact that even in the darkest of times, hope could be found, and defiance could manifest in unexpected ways. It underscored the truth that courage wasn't solely the domain of soldiers or grand gestures, it resided in the small, seemingly insignificant acts of ordinary people. Lucy's red ribbon, her carefully dropped note, had become a symbol, not just of a successful diversion, but of the enduring, unbreakable spirit of resistance. It was a reminder that even the smallest acts of defiance, when executed with ingenuity and bravery, could have a significant, even life-saving, impact. The village, battered and weary, felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet resolve to continue their fight, knowing that even their children possessed an indomitable will to resist. The war was far from over, but in that moment, among the fields of bocage, they had found a new, unexpected source of strength, one born from the courage of a 10-year-old girl. The immediate danger might have been averted, the Gestapo temporarily outsmarted, but the suffocating reality of occupation remained, a pervasive shadow clinging to every hedgerow and cobblestone. Yet, in the quiet aftermath, a profound shift occurred within the village. Lucy's act, whispered from parent to child, from neighbor to trusted friend, quickly wove itself into the fabric of their daily resistance, becoming a quiet legend, a beacon of hope in the pervasive gloom. It wasn't spoken of openly, never in front of the ever-present German patrols, but it resided in the knowing glances, the shared, almost imperceptible smiles, and the renewed resolve that settled upon faces previously etched with despair. The community, once fractured by fear, felt an invisible thread of solidarity tighten, stronger than ever. They had faced the monster, and a 10-year-old girl had shown them that even the most formidable enemy could be outmaneuvered. This shared secret, this quiet triumph, fortified their collective spirit, preparing them for the battles yet to come, battles they knew would be fought not with guns, but with cunning and unwavering courage. Weeks later, the rhythm of Allied bombings over the distant coast had intensified, a constant, low growl that vibrated through the earth, a symphony of destruction promising ultimate liberation. Lucy, back in the familiar, comforting confines of her family's bakery, kneaded dough with small, practiced hands. The scent of warm flour, yeast, and baking bread filled the air, a stark contrast to the acrid smell of fear that had permeated the village not long ago. Her movements were precise, methodical, yet there was a subtle tremor in her fingers, a ghost of the frantic energy that had propelled her on that fateful morning. The memory of the black Mercedes, the grim faces of the Gestapo, the red ribbon fluttering defiantly, it was all etched deeply into her young mind, a permanent scar on the landscape of her childhood. She was still just Lucy, a 10-year-old girl who loved to help her parents, who cherished the simple joy of a fresh baguette and the warmth of the sun on her face. But she was also irrevocably changed. Her childhood, once a tapestry woven with innocent joys and simple wonders, now bore the indelible mark of extraordinary courage, of a day when the weight of an entire village's hope had rested squarely on her small shoulders. The world had demanded more of her than any child should ever have to give, and she had risen to the challenge with an astonishing blend of ingenuity and bravery. Her eyes, once merely observant, now held a deeper wisdom, a quiet understanding of the complexities of good and evil, of the hidden strength found in ordinary people during extraordinary times. She understood that heroism wasn't always about grand, public acts, but often lay in the quiet, desperate moments when one chose defiance over despair, courage over surrender. The war had stolen a piece of her innocence, but it had also forged within her an unshakable spirit, resilient and unbowed. Her parents, working alongside her, cast loving, proud glances in her direction. They knew the depth of the burden she carried, the quiet strength that now resided within their daughter. They saw not just Lucy, but the quiet hero who had saved them all. Her story, the tale of the girl and the red ribbon, would be passed down, whispered in hushed tones around future fireplaces, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest hours of human history, light can be found in the most unexpected places. It was a story of defiance, of resilience, of the unbreakable human spirit against seemingly insurmountable odds. If Lucy's incredible story has stirred something within you, if you find yourself captivated by these untold acts of bravery that shaped our history, then honor her legacy and the countless others like her. Hit that subscribe button below to join our community and never miss another powerful tale of courage. Give this video a like to help us share Lucy's story with a wider audience, and please, share it with your friends and family. Let's ensure these vital narratives of hidden strength and quiet heroism from World War II continue to inspire generations to come. Your support helps us uncover and preserve these crucial chapters of our shared past.